Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome. I'm Clint with the Scottish Clans. Thank you for joining me today. And I've got a question for you. Have you ever washed your hands purely for the peace of mind of somebody else? Like you knew darn well that your hands were perfectly clean? I haven't either. But if you have done that, subscribe to this channel. I'm going to cover these clans that are so old that a lot of you have never heard of them before, and don't turn it off yet. They're still important, and the reason for that is that a lot of clans that you have heard about, and you might even be connected to them, spring out of these really old clans. And that reminds me of something. Do you know the clan that you're connected to the strongest link to it? Maybe it's your last name, or it's somewhere farther back in your family tree, but you are connected to this kindred. Do you know when they were founded? Do you know who the person that they take their name from, or the first actual recorded chief of this clan? Do you know what that is? I challenge you to go look it up and then come right back and put it in the comments. This will be actually one of the most informative comment section on YouTube. It'll be awesome. Look, a lot of you are interested in the Scottish clans because of a genealogical connection to Scotland. You want to find out how you plug in to the Scottish clans. You want to know what is the rest of my story, and how does that contribute to who I am today. And I'm sorry to say I haven't been very helpful to a lot of you, but I'm really happy to say that I've partnered with MyHeritage. And MyHeritage has a lot to offer you to push back your family tree, to broaden this picture and help you to see the story of who you are and who your ancestors were. So I've got here by going to Manage Trees. I've already got one started, but I don't want to show you that. If you're just barely starting, you can see there's a lot of people already loaded in mine. If you're just starting, you'd come up here to Add Family Tree. This is what you do if you're starting from scratch. And it's super intuitive, it's super user-friendly. Enter in some basic information for your mother and your father. This is actually what I did do this to start off, even though I did something else later to import more names. But to start, I just did this and entered in my grandparents as well. And I found it very quick. The database is huge. It's like 33 billion files or access to names that you can drop into to try to find that. So the chances that the person you're looking for as in that huge pool is pretty good. So, and mine were for sure. And so I was able to get off to a great start with my family tree. Now, if you're like me and you are the beneficiary of generations of people who've been working on your family tree and it is very well developed, then let me show you what else you can do that's really cool that MyHeritage is a feature with them. Now, up until my partnership with MyHeritage, 95% of my family history work was done within Family Search. And like I said, my tree is huge, and it's no credit to me. But rather than come in here, and I'll tell you this, I did not enter in all of these names individually or spend all the research time finding them. I took work that's already been done. It's already in Family Search. And I just imported, you can see this feature right here of sync. And I actually imported all of this work, this huge database, this huge framework that is my family tree, that is my history, that these are my people, and I just pulled them over in one huge effort, and they landed here, and now I've got this squared away family tree. Now, one thing I do want to mention about the difference between MyHeritage, because some of you might be wondering, well, if I'm already doing work in Family Search, why would I jump over to MyHeritage and start all over? It's not that, like I just showed you, you don't have to start over. And another thing is that MyHeritage answers some drawbacks about the Family Search platform. One of them being that if you have a distant cousin who's working on the same line that you are, and you've gone to all this work to find solid sources, and you just know that this is the next person back in the family tree, and you've added that, they can actually willy-nilly get in there and change it. And so the cool thing about MyHeritage is you can get in here and lock this up and decide who has access to this and who doesn't. All right, check this out. I uploaded this picture of my ancestor. This is my grandmother's grandfather, the first in this line to be born in America. His parents were both Welsh, and it's striking resemblance to me. But look at this cool thing you can do with this. Isn't that cool? It totally brings him to life, but not as much as this does. Look at that. Isn't that? It's like my great-great-grandfather is sitting in front of me, who
happens to look a lot like me. So that's a really cool feature. And then another thing, MyHeritage has a really developed DNA component to it. So, and they have some really cool features. I actually came into contact with them at Roots Tech, and I was able to see a lot of the demonstrations and displays that they had on there. Really cool things they're doing with DNA. This is something you really want to look at. So if you're ready to take your family history work to the next level, go ahead and scan that QR code or follow that link that I have posted and watch the story of your people unfold before you. Watch this come to life. Access the 33 billion name database that they can give you access to. But it's not just about the database. It's about identity. It's about finding out your story. This is not just going to bless your life. It's going to bless generations to come.
All right, it's a free trial, free 14-day trial. Don't have anything to lose. Try it out. If you don't like it, don't pay. All right, so today my content is inspired by, speaking of old clans, one of the oldest members of our community. And no, I don't mean years-wise, because he'd be totally offended if I said that. Although he is retired, living the good life, he's been in our community for a long time. That's what I meant by old. Since my podcast was not even 6 months old, I think, this gentleman was in there commenting, adding value. He's super, like, not only is he just smart, but he's very educated. Shout out to Neil King. And the reason why he is the one behind this is because he said something kind of crazy. Let me know what you think. He said that he's not even interested in the origins of clans, like the origin stories. And that's one of the things I'm most interested in. His reason was because most of it's just pure fantasy. They decided whoever were the cool kids at the time, how can we make our genealogy go back into them? And it's just all baloney. Now, he's actually right. There's enough clans out there who have actually done that, but that doesn't represent all of them. There are a lot of clans where we can actually, I think we go into two categories. One, really accurately trace it back because it is right there in the historical record. And two, there's other ones that there's enough of a historical record that we can get a pretty good idea. And there's scholars who have come up with some pretty good theories, pretty sound, but it's not the gospel truth yet until we learn more. All right, for this episode, we are going to be referring to some of these books right here. This is where I'm pulling most of my information. I'll include links to these, Amazon links to these books in the description. So if you want to follow up, I'm pulling most of my information out of books like these. So what clans are these? What are these old clans that we've probably never heard of, but they're super old, but then from them spring other clans that we do know about and play a big role in Scottish history? The first one I'm going to go from north to south. The first one's going to be Ó Beóláin. That was the surname of the original Earls of Ross. The first one of those that pops up on the radar, this is the Mackenzies or MacRaes, or that's a thing in the past, is the Ferricker Mac and Taggart. Now, Mac and Taggart means son of the priest. That wasn't his surname. He was actually a son of the priest. His surname was Ó Beóláin, which is unique because it has that O, which you don't see very often in Scotland like you do in Ireland. Anyway, he comes from this kindred called Ó Beóláin, which is it's already a big enough kindred that in the early 1200s, at the head of this kindred, he can rise up and smash a rebellion against the kings of the Scots, or the kings of Alba. And for his services, he's rewarded with a knighthood, and then very shortly after that, he's rewarded with an earldom. So it's a pretty big deal. He becomes Earl of Ross, and for the next, not only he, but the next 2 or 3 generations keep the surname Ó Beóláin, and then after that, they go in favor of using the name of the earldom as their surname, and so that's how they get the Ross surname. And also a clan bearing that name of Ross comes from them. Now, the earldom would go out of this line of chiefs. It would go through an heiress to the Leslies, and then from there, the Stuarts and the Lords of the Isles, the MacDonalds, would fight this huge battle, the Battle of Harlaw, and other conflicts would come from that, 1411. But the leadership of the Clan Ross would actually not go out through the heiress. It would go through a brother of a previous chief, and that line would become styled Ross of Balnagowan. But they come out of this original older kindred of Ó Beóláin. I've heard theories that they came originally from Sligo, which Alexander Grant in this book here, he really pushes back hard on that, says the evidence for that's pretty shaky. but wherever they came from, we don't have the origin story of them. They're old. Now, another surname, I don't know if you knew this, but a lot of the Highland clans actually have another name in Gaelic. And for the Clan Ross, that would be Clann Anriais or Clann Ghille Anriais. That means the clan or the children of the devotee of St. Andrew. Now, that Clann Anriais or anglicized as Gilleanders was not just another name for the Ó Beóláins. It was actually a completely different kindred. Well, then how did that name become applied as a Gaelic name for the Clan Ross? Because in the first half of the 1400s, there was a fairly notorious, kind of a renegade character who was at the head of this Clan Gilleanders. His name is Paul MacTira, and he had didn't have a son to inherit his stuff. He just had an heiress. This is Alexander Grant's theory here. And the chief of the Rosses, Ross of Balnagowan, marries this heiress, and not only with lands and titles or anything else that comes with this inheritance through the heiress, but also the leadership of her clan, which is something very analogous to what happened with the Sutherlands, but something which the Rosses a few generations earlier were not ready to accept, that somebody coming in through an heiress would be their chief. They went back in a branch of the male line. They made sure that those are the chiefs, but they become the leaders of an older kindred that we don't see very much today, called Gilleanders or Clann Ghille Anriais. So how old is that clan? We don't know. We don't know how old that is. There might be some speculation out there, but we're talking about these older kindreds, both connected to the Clan Ross. Next, very close geographically to this, is a person by the name of Gilleoin of the Ard. The Ard is an area to the west. It's a low-lying, fertile, very rich country to the west of Inverness. And this person, this Gilleoin, was very powerful, probably already at the head of a kindred. This was a kin-based society. But from him, so you actually do have a clan spring from him. You have a group of people whose territory stretches from the Ard by Inverness all the way to the west coast in an area called Kintail, which is the part of the mainland that faces the Isle of Skye. And so there's a very large territory, and this group of people become known as MacGilchrists, from Gilleoin of the Ard. And three very notable clans come from him. The top of the list would be the Mackenzies. That's the most powerful clan, but also who are known as the Mackenzie's shirt of mail. That would be the MacRaes. They off and on fulfill the roles, their chiefs fulfill the roles of constable of Ellendonan Castle, which is one of the most breathtaking views in all of Scotland. This castle that sits, and it's a reconstructed castle. It's not the original, but it sits right where three Highland lochs come together, and they form this really scenic area. But the MacRaes were the constables of that castle. Another group that comes out of this MacGilleoin kindred are the Mathesons, who were at one time actually very powerful. Their power wanes, and they become very localized in importance, but still important in Kintail with the MacRaes and the MacLennans. And not sure on the MacLennan origin. If you know that, put it in the comments as well. So you have the Mackenzies, the Mathesons, and the MacRaes coming out of this earlier kindred known as MacGilleoin, from Gilleoin of the Ard, who would have been coming from yet an earlier kindred. I do want to take just a brief second to pause and say that how old are clans, period. Some people are out there, and some actually pretty reputable sources will say that clans develop out of this fusion of these political ideas that are often referred to as feudalism that the Normans bring in from the continental Europe, and an earlier tribal tradition of the native Celtic-speaking people there, and that's what clans come out of. There is a degree of truth to that, but there's an implication that before the Normans come in, there's no clans in Scotland. And actually, refer back to John Bannerman here, he says that the word clan was actually being, instead of literally the children of, being used to imply a broader kindred. So how we would more use the word clan, that actually goes back to the 900s. So that's quite a bit earlier than the Normans coming in, about 200 years earlier than the Normans coming in to Scotland. So no, there was clans before the Normans came in. Now, am I saying that there wasn't a huge influence made by the Normans and what we'd call feudalism on the socio-political landscape of Scotland? No, I'm not saying that. It was a profound influence. and maybe you could say the clans as we know them today, or as for a more recent historical period, would have come from that fusion. You could say that would be accurate, but there were clans being called clans before the Normans. Back on track, the next group, moving from north to south, that I want to address are the Ó Duibhnes or Ó Duibhnes. Now, the Campbells, their homeland, their place of origin is actually farther south in Scotland. Stephen Boardman makes a great argument that they are actually come out of the Britons of Strathclyde. That's their lineage, although they become Gaelicized. And how do they get up and established in the Loch area? One theory is that they married into the Ó Duibhnes. It's interesting, just like the Gaelic name, or another Gaelic name for the Clan Ross would be Clann Anriais. The Campbells had something very similar to that going on with them. They're in a similar style, in a poetic Gaelic style, they would be referred to as Clan Ó Duibhne or Duibhne or Guibhne or something like that. My Gaelic, please forgive it. But that's how they become associated with that. And so if they did marry an heiress, this is one theory of the Ó Duibhnes, and they inherited the leadership of that kindred through that interaction and territory and lordship in that area, then they would also assume that name in some circles. Okay, so and how old are the Ó Duibhnes? No idea. We wouldn't even know about them if it wasn't for the Campbells. We wouldn't even know about the Ó Beóláins if it wasn't for Ferachar Mac and Taggart and his descendants. We wouldn't even know about a lot of these groups. They would just be lost to time, and by chance, a member of the kindred becomes super notable, did something great, and now all of a sudden we know about this group that. So that begs the question: how many other kindreds were there out there, and we have no idea about them? Now back to the Campbells. In addition to the Ó Duibhnes that come to light because of their connection to the Campbells, you also have a group that was very powerful in the north end of Loch Awe, similar in that neighborhood, and that would have been the MacAlpins, whose chiefs may have styled themselves of Glenorchy. So they had the lordship of that area. Another theory is that an heiress from the MacAlpins marries a younger son of the Earl of Argyll, who inherits the lordship of Glenorchy, and so you have a very powerful branch of the Campbells establish themselves there, but they're coming out of an earlier kindred or marrying into an earlier kindred known as MacAlpin. Another cool and interesting thing. This is my boy Raptor here, buddy. Cool dog, a Dutch Shepherd. Okay. This earlier kindred, one interesting thing about the MacAlpins is that a junior branch of this clan that was not in line to inherit the lordship becomes the MacGregors. At least that's a theory pushed forward by Dr. Martin MacGregor in his PhD thesis that we did cover in my interview with him. And so if you have any interest in Campbell or MacGregor stuff, go back and listen to that interview that I had. It was a very enjoyable experience that I had with him. And the last group I want to discuss are a group called MacGilchrists. Now, there were a couple of kindreds known as MacGilchrists in the Western Highlands. This group is actually a cadet branch of the Earls of Lennox. Now, this isn't a super old branch, so we're kind of a little bit coming at it from a different angle here. The only reason I include them is because they clearly show this process of an earlier kindred, and then another kindred comes out of it, and everybody knows the later kindred, and nobody knows the earlier kindred. So that's why I included them in this list. Also, I've got an ancestral connection to them, so there's a little bias in there. So you have the Earls of Lennox. Some people argue whether the first Earl of Lennox was of Saxon background or Gaelic or even Briton of Strathclyde. I'm not going to get into that. But the important thing is you have in the early 1200s a younger son of the Earl of Lennox who's not going to inherit the earldom. His name's Gilchrist. And he's going to receive by charter in 1225, I think it was, the lordship of Errichar. And that's important because he begats a kindred or a clan known as MacGilchrists down through the next few generations. One thing that you learn from John Bannerman is that it doesn't take very long, just a couple of generations after the namesake, the eponym of this kindred, the one they take their name from, a couple of generations later, 2 or 3, they can already have a larger, broader kindred going by that name for the kindred. And so I think that's something, you see something like that happening with the MacGilchrists here. By the end of that century, so a few generations later, and I can't remember exactly how many, you have a chief of this lineage whose name is Parlin. Now, Parlin did something great, and for a long time I had no idea what it was that he did that was so great that everybody would stop saying MacGilchrists and now go by MacFarlane. You see how that works with the genitive case, the possessive case? You change the initial consonant. So instead of MacParlane, it's MacFarlane, and that's where that name comes from. But I recently was reading this, which if you have any interest at all or any connection to a clan that comes from the Argyll area, the Campbells were such a big deal in that area that their history is kind of the history of Argyll and includes, so this book, and this is actually a series of this 3-volume collection, has a ton of information about other clans in that area. So I recommend it. Once again, links in the description if that book's still available. The important part here is that instead of MacGilchrist, Parlin's descendants call their name after him. And so today we know about the MacFarlanes of Errichar, whereas who were the MacGilchrists before that? They kind of faded out. And so we see the whole process from start to finish. And that's why I included them and wanted to show you that process. So we have a handful of clans that are older, that go back who knows how far, that we wouldn't even know about except for one of their members, one of their chiefs became a notable figure in Scottish history. And then all of a sudden you're aware of this whole other group that otherwise would be completely unknown. I think that's fascinating. I think the origin stories are fascinating. My next episode or my next video will probably be about the oldest Scottish clans that we would be familiar with today. So once again, the challenge is, which clan are you connected to and what was their origin? Like what time period do they come out of? Drop that in the comments. Also go to MyHeritage if you think that'll be helpful for you at all, or if you just want to mess around with it and see, get yourself a free 14-day trial. That's all I got. Martian Leif and Jost.